This podcast has been produced on the traditional lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples. From 2RPH, this is Passing Thoughts. I'm Rob Caldor. This is a series where we talk openly and honestly about death, dying, and everything in between. If you've missed any previous episodes, and we're now in our second series, they're available to listen back on your favourite podcast app. In today's episode, Connie Mason speaks with Amanda Simons from the Carer Gateway. Amanda's own experience as a carer led her to the Carer Gateway, an organisation that offers vital support to people caring for others through challenging times. Connie Mason takes up the story with Amanda.
I'd like to talk first, if I may, about your mother, Esther. Can you tell me a little bit about your mum and what she was like before she became unwell?
My mum was a very unusual and interesting person who'd had an amazing life. She wrote a memoir about her life, which was published by the Jewish Museum. Mm. She was born in the middle of the Holocaust in Hungary, in Budapest, and she survived. Her mother had to give her to a family as a baby to look after her, and so she was separated from her mother for 18 months or 2 years during the war. Her mother managed to survive and be reunited with baby Esther, and they survived the war and eventually migrated to Australia, met my father. As she used to say, she achieved all her goals. She got married, she had children, she got a law degree, she became a lawyer and solicitor. But she also had some hardships later in life. She divorced from my father. That was very difficult, obviously. One of my brothers has mental illness and she was affected by that. But she also became a grandmother, which she was thrilled about, to two children, my niece and nephew. And she set up her own business as a solicitor as well, which had been one of her dreams, and became a local suburban solicitor. And was, as she said, living her best life in retirement until she got cancer. She was a hub for the family. She moved herself geographically to Western Sydney, to an area she'd never before been that familiar with or lived in. She sold her home in the eastern suburbs to move to Western Sydney so that she could be geographically in the middle of her 3 children and 2 grandchildren who were spread from the east to Lithgow on the far side of the Blue Mountains and out in Narelle and Campbelltown. So she set herself up in the middle in Penrith, and we all used to go there to gather once a week at her home. And that's how she was living and happy until she suddenly got diagnosed completely out of the blue. A perfectly well, I think 78-year-old got diagnosed with cancer.
She did have a very full life, and sounds like she was a really dedicated mother and grandmother. And when she was first diagnosed with cancer, you continued to work because at that stage you didn't realise it was terminal. Is that right?
It was all very unclear. She had some lumps in her leg. She got told it was cancer. She was living in Penrith and the nearest hospital, Nepean, didn't have a cancer centre. So the GP said, you're going to have to pick a hospital with a cancer centre for your treatment. There's Westmead, which was nowhere near her and nowhere near any of us, or there's Prince of Wales or RPA. You just need to choose. And we were thinking, well, what are we going to do? She lives on her own in Penrith. How's she going to get to appointments? We sort of had to work out what to do as a family, and I was living alone, renting, working, living my life. And she and I talked and we agreed we'd have a little adventure. She always saw life as an adventure, even adverse events like this. She saw the opportunity to have fun and do something new. And so we thought we'll have a little adventure. We'll pick a nice apartment to rent together that's bigger, because I was living in a small 1-bedroom. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment. One of my brothers pointed out to me privately, without speaking to Mum, that we might need to make sure it was accessible, just in case. He had worked at a cancer charity and had in his mind that she might have treatment and might feel unwell, and so we needed a sort of lift and a bathroom with an accessible shower. And we found a lovely apartment that we rented together, and we moved in together, and I continued to work. But I would take time off here and there to take her to appointments.
But at that stage you were already making decisions in her best interest.
In hindsight, I don't like to think of making decisions without her involvement. Certainly she looked at the apartments with me online. It was a bit far for her to come and see them all, and she loved the look of this apartment and loved that it had an internal courtyard. All the units' balconies faced onto this internal courtyard, and I loved that she said it felt like Europe. In Hungary,
Yes,
they'd had that a lot. I suppose we were, as a family, thinking in the background what might lie ahead, and we had no idea, and the doctor hadn't really said, because I guess the doctor at that point had no idea.
And so in those early days, what did your role as a carer look like?
It was accompanying her to appointments. She was able to go by herself, but she liked to have somebody there, and it was helpful to have someone help absorb the information. And I suppose for emotional support, the very first appointment where she got diagnosed, the GP, I took her to that appointment, and that was the result of almost a family intervention where Dad had been saying to us, your mother has these lumps on her leg and she's not doing anything about it. He was very worried. She'd been to a local GP in Penrith who'd recommended a scan, and it hadn't made any sense. He'd said to go to an orthopaedic surgeon, and she was thinking, why would I do that? And she didn't have faith in this doctor, and she was just sort of letting it go. And so Dad told the rest of us, and we had a sort of family catch up at Penrith around the kitchen table, me, Dad and my two brothers, and we said to her, we're worried. And I and Dad came up with this idea, why don't we go to Dad's nice GP and I'll take you, we'll make a fun day of it. I'll take a day off work, which I did. We'll go to lunch, we'll go to the GP. And she thought, that sounds fun. And she was on board. So I suppose it started that day we went to that first appointment.
Right. What a great attitude your family had. Is that one of the things that's difficult, navigating the healthcare, and that's one of the roles that you saw yourself playing in the early days?
I think navigating the healthcare system is extremely difficult for carers and patients, and even for someone like me that's a social worker who had worked in health, albeit mental health. It's extremely confusing, unclear, communication can be so poor. And I was helping with all of that as much as I could. But it's very, very difficult for carers, that aspect. And yes, so that was part of my caring role.
What about the other parts of your life? And in the early days, was it pretty well life as normal for you? And did that change over time?
Things changed in that we would find out bits of information that started to suggest this was much worse than it had appeared. First, there was treatment, so you sort of have hope when there's treatment, and the oncologist gave the odds of the treatment working, and Mum and I had another fun outing. We went to dinner in a Thai restaurant that night after we had that meeting with the oncologist, and I remember her, and her great mind sort of going over the odds that the oncologist had given and sort of saying in a very pragmatic way, well, they're not that great actually, whereas I was focused on this treatment does work for a lot of people, so let's stay hopeful. And then things just changed. It was funny. Time was very slow but very quick. So nothing would happen. But then suddenly she would have a blood test and they'd say, oh, your liver's very failing, dangerously badly affected by this treatment. You must enter hospital immediately. You must be admitted immediately. And so I'd take her in and she'd be suddenly in hospital. So then my caring role would be trying to bring her clothes and things that she might need, toiletries, because it had all happened so fast. Things changed, and then there were periods of sudden deterioration. She had a hospital admission where she had gone in seeming mentally fine, and then during that admission she was wandering at night to the nurses' station confused about where she was, and you'd come and visit her and she'd think she was in a different suburb one day, but then the next day she'd be completely fine and Dad would bring in the chessboard and they'd be playing chess. So my role then became that after that admission I was worried when she comes home, if she's this confused, how are we going to manage things at home? And during that admission there was a moment where which we sort of laughed about, she as well later, she tried to make an escape, even though it wasn't a locked ward or anything, it was a lovely private hospital, and she went running out of the building and tried to climb and was halfway up the fence when I got a phone call saying, your mother's trying to climb out of the hospital, it's not even locked. So she had some idea she was locked in somewhere.
And Amanda, I mean, that sounds like an amusing anecdote, but really that must have been troubling to see that deterioration your mother, and something that was unexpected.
That was very, very difficult for all of us. She was such an intellect. Yes. And so when you have somebody like that who's then their intellect's being impacted, it's very upsetting. And yet she was maintaining her intelligence, and she started having these conversations with me with these grand plans about what she was going to do with her house and real estate plans and things she wanted to buy and do, and it was all very planned out and spoken in her usual intellectual lawyer fashion. And yet at the same time you were thinking, but this is crazy, you're in hospital, how are we going to do all this? And then by the next morning she rang and said, sorry about all that, I don't know what I was talking about, that was a lot of rubbish last night.
But that's a big change in your caring role. Now you're not just managing the physical challenges of the bathroom being accessible, but you're managing some psychological impacts, which is part of a change in your mother's personality. Was that the way it came?
Yes, I mean, she maintained this happy nature. The other thing that was difficult is sharing information with family. So she, in some ways, was private. She was a very social person, very close to a lot of friends, a lot of beloved relatives and neighbours. People loved her so much. This all happened quite quickly in a way, and people wanted to know what was going on. I'd be dealing with all of this, and then an email would come saying, I'm trying to reach your mother and she's not answering. What's happening? And then, she was, of course, understandably focused on her own health and dealing with that, and I was too. But at the same time, I was saying to her, we need to tell people what's happening. What can we tell people? And we had this sort of argument early on where she said, I'm the patient. It's up to me.
So that's difficult because you both had needs. You needed to satisfy the curiosity of the people that loved her, and you also needed to respect her wishes. So how do you handle something like that?
Yeah, that was difficult. And even telling the very closest family members when her prognosis became a bit clearer and we knew that the cancer had spread, that was hard. I remember talking to her about letting her brother in Melbourne know, and she and he were very close. She only had one sibling and she only has one cousin, and I said, when are we going to tell him? And she said she would. And then they had a phone call and I asked what happened and she hadn't told him. So I suppose it was very hard for her, and I wanted to be empathetic, and my social work training is all about respecting the wishes of the person and letting people make the decisions for themselves. But I felt, we need to let people know. So in the end, how did we deal with it? We just kept talking, and, we are a close family. The others became involved when she told my brothers and my father, then we all helped to communicate. But, for example, there was a sad moment where I think she'd told my brother, and my nephew was in the room. He was quite young, and so he had heard. And then we had a Zoom call because it was COVID as well, so we were having a lot of Zoom calls with my niece and her nan that she lives with, and my brother and my nephew. And my nephew blurted it out, that Grandma's got cancer and it's spread. And my niece burst into tears, and that was how she found out. That was very hard.
Did you realise that her illness was terminal?
No, I don't think so. There was, I feel, very poor communication by the oncologist, and Mum didn't like me. I'm a social worker. I want to advocate. I want to complain. I want to give feedback. I want to improve systems. And I wanted to put in a complaint about this oncologist, and she wouldn't let me. And I wanted to ring the oncologist, which I ended up doing. We really wanted to know what was happening, what was the prognosis.
So she wasn't communicating with you?
No, she said, we had this awful phone call where she said, I asked what the prognosis was, and she laughed. She actually laughed, and she said, I can't tell you that, Amanda, only God knows that. This is a public hospital with no religious affiliation.
So there wasn't the pressure from your mother to find out, but you felt that you needed to know. Was that for a particular reason?
I suppose I wanted to know what was coming and what we needed to do and what what approach to take and practical considerations about her house. I think we thought she's going to stay with me for a while in this apartment, have some chemo and then go back home and everything will resume, which happens with people, right? She was a perfectly well 78-year-old. People have cancer like that and recover.
Yep.
And actually we weren't dealing with that. She was going to be dead in 18 months.
Right.
She ended up having surgery on her leg at some point, just almost for cosmetic reasons. And we had a follow-up appointment with a surgical registrar. He was a surgical registrar on a rotation, and he was the nicest person we encountered in this whole journey in the medical world. I'll never forget that young man, and we only had a few meetings with him, and he was so kind and he saw the whole person. He really listened to the two of us. And I did ask him in that appointment, somehow she was on board, and we asked him what did he think she was her prognosis, and he just looked it up. He just said, with your symptoms and where you're at, and he had a look, and you're stage 4, which no one had really clearly communicated to us that she had stage 4 cancer. And he looked it up, and I think he said 3 to 6 months. And from that date, I think it was about 8 months till she died. The moment where she accepted and realised what was happening was when she had another hospital admission a little bit later, and they said, the cancer spread to your brain. There's nothing further we can do. There's no further treatment. And we went home after that appointment, by the way, with no referrals for support, no referrals to palliative care, no explanation of what comes next. We went home and we talked, and she wrote a letter, which we then put in a booklet at her funeral, a beautiful letter. And she still had all her faculties at that point, saying to my family and friends, I'm passing on to the next generation, and I've achieved all my goals, and please don't be sad. That was when they said, we can't do any more treatment, and that's when she became interested in voluntary assisted dying. She was a believer in that. She was a member of Exit International. At that time, voluntary assisted dying was not legal in New South Wales. As a lawyer, she was very across the details of the law, and so she and I spoke about that her wishes would be to choose the time of her dying and the place of her dying and the manner of her dying. But unfortunately that wasn't legal, but she did look into it as much as she could. There were a few barriers. One was that she found out you needed a birth certificate, and she didn't have one because she was born in the middle of the war. So she started looking into trying to get to the Hungarian embassy to try and get one to arrange this. And she also looked in or discussed with me how she would have to book a ticket and go without telling me, because she was very concerned as a lawyer. She didn't want me to be under any risk of any charges about being involved. So she said, if this happens, one day you'll just get up and there'll be a letter on the table that I've gone, and you can show the police that letter.
Amanda, that must have been so emotional for you.
It was. Of course, yes, it was. I just feel such respect for her, though, that she was so strong and she wasn't distressed telling me that. But the hard and sad thing was none of that worked, because then the borders closed because of COVID. And she said, well, that's it. There's no option for me. It wasn't legal in New South Wales.
Right.
And then that's very sad to think she just had to suffer.
With your experience as a social worker, and also you did that placement for palliative care, navigating the health system was difficult, and also that incredible emotional support that you had to provide. Did anyone have your back?
I mean, I had a lovely informal network of friends and family that were really there for me, particularly my friends, obviously my family too, but they were going through this themselves. But my friends were so wonderful. I was very lucky. But what stands out for me is that some people won't have that. And some people won't have my resources, my fluency in English, my fluency in the health system. And even somebody like me was up in the middle of the night trying to find what number to call for help in the middle of the night when she was discharged from hospital without a plan or support, with mobility issues in the middle of the night, trying to go to the bathroom, and also confused at that point, and me staying awake all night, listening out, thinking if she gets up and she won't remember to use the walker, she's going to have a fall. So I'm staying awake all night, Googling, trying to work out, well, what is supposed to happen in this situation?
So how did that affect your health? You must have been pretty exhausted after.
Yeah, so by then I had taken time off work. Mum and I had talked about that, and we'd agreed a bit before that, where she still sort of she was still 100% mentally with it. We talked about a plan and we agreed I'd take some time off work. So I took unpaid leave, which ended up being about 8 months off. But moments like that were very dark for me, very, very hard, very lonely, very sad, and I felt so much anger. That's something that I really relate to when in my current work people call and I might hear in their voice that anger as a carer, the system. That really resonates with me, and it's very gratifying to me to really be able to validate that for the caller and also share a couple of tips, usually if I can, about how to navigate things.
Well, you've just been so generous in sharing that story. That really brings home the emotional reality of caring, and your experience gave you a really deep understanding of what carers go through. So after your mum died, you answered an advertisements for a job with the Carer Gateway. You're now the first port of call when a carer rings looking for help. So how do you start that conversation?
When someone calls the Carer Gateway, they will reach me or one of my colleagues, and we start by clarifying their eligibility as a carer. And the funny thing is, a lot of people don't realise that they're a carer. They'll say, oh, I'm not paid, or I don't live with the person. Well, the Carer Gateway considers someone a carer if they're doing any of a range of caring tasks. And those tasks could be anything from emotional support to organising services to visiting and dropping off food, doing shopping, right to the other extreme where people are there 24 hours a day. So all those people are carers. So we let people know that they're a carer and that they're eligible for support.
What sort of support are people looking for?
In any particular day, there can be a huge range of phone calls, and I might receive a call from a carer who has no idea we exist, has been caring for some time and has just picked up a brochure or seen an ad or done a Google search, and they'll have no idea what the support is that's available, and I'll share that with them. And people are very grateful and pleased. Sometimes people are disappointed that they didn't find out sooner, but they're very pleased. Other people have been told by a hospital social worker to call and been told what we can provide, and then they'll ring up specifically to get that.
So do you hear their stories?
We have to, because in order to work out whether they're eligible and to get them registered with our service, we need to know what's the caring situation and note that down with their consent. We document that. So I hear stories every day.
You connect to people who feel angry. Can you tell me about one of those occasions?
I had a carer call up, and I suppose I related because it was a woman caring for her mother, and she was juggling the responsibility of caring for her young children with also caring for her mother, who was receiving palliative care. And she was so angry with the lack of planning from the services and the lack of information about what she could access and what she should do next. And that really resonated with me. And I validated her feelings and I explained what we could offer at the Carer Gateway, which she was really pleased to hear. One of the things she was interested in is that we have counselling, and it's completely free for carers, and they can have up to 6 sessions. Sometimes, in some cases, that can be extended. With a counsellor, it's flexible. She was interested that it can be done over the phone or online, because she said with the kids and dealing with the mum, she said there's no way I can get into an office to meet this counsellor. So she was really interested in that, and also in the practical support. So the Carer Gateway also offers some short-term in-home support for the care recipient, the person needing the care. A care worker can come in, and this carer that called was so pleased about that idea, particularly when she had things on with the kids and then the mother needed something. She was hoping to use this package through us to have a care worker come and look after her mum on those times of day or days where she couldn't, because she had things going on with the kids that she couldn't get out of.
So you did get some home help with your mum from Carer Gateway.
So I did myself ring Carer Gateway. I knew about Carer Gateway because I was a social worker, and I did have a very positive experience when I called. So we also have something called coaching, which is more practical support and goal-based guidance. And I think looking back, there were things going on. It's hard to tell when you're in the middle of it, but looking back, there were things going on that were so hard to navigate, the complexity of the family situation and mum being private, but people asking me questions, and the advanced care planning. You know, as a lawyer, for some reason she was sort of reluctant to do an advanced care directive because she kept saying this is a legal document and I don't know how things are going to turn out. And I felt as a social worker I'd sort of learnt that it's a good thing to have, and things like that. I think talking to one of the Carer Gateway coaches, you have these sessions with them and they give you sort of practical guidance and strategies around dealing with the family situation or dealing with the advanced care planning documents. I could have used those services.
Can you tell me about a carer plan and a carer card?
Yes, so the Carer Gateway is a national service that the federal government funds, and the National Carer Gateway website has carer emergency care plan and card that carers can download or print out, and it's a document that then is kept in the home that says all the things that the care recipient needs, who are the key contacts, who is the carer, and the care recipient can carry around in their wallet a small cut down version, which is the card that has the name of their carer on it and the carer's phone number. And again, that's something we didn't have, which would have been good because Mum liked going out for walks and going up the road. And for a while, because of this treatment she was on, later when she was having a bit of cognitive issues, there was at least one time, if not two times, where she got lost. And she managed to get someone to help her, to call me. And this happens, I'll have carers ring and say to me that they're dealing with a family member with dementia or with cognitive issues as a result of their terminal illness, who are wandering or who get lost. And having this card in your wallet means the care recipient can hand that to someone, or paramedics can find it, and it says who is your carer and what's their phone number.
I was actually really amazed when I read that 70% of palliative care is provided by unpaid family carers.
I felt so passionate about the fact that carers need support too, and that was one of the reasons I was drawn to work in a service supporting carers, because I've been a carer, and yes, there are supports for the patient and services for the patient, and that's the focus of all the medical care and allied health. Everything is focused around the patient, which is right and as it should be. But there's this other person, this other figure in the room, and sometimes multiple people.
If you were speaking to one of those people who've just become a carer for the loved one for the first time, what might you want to say to them?
I would say to them that you matter too, and what you're doing is a wonderful thing, and you deserve support as well. You need it. You need to look after yourself in order to maintain your caring abilities. There is support there, and you are entitled to that, and you deserve that.
A big thank you to Amanda Simons for sharing her story. We have a link to the Carer Gateway in the show notes. Thanks again to Connie Mason for your effort in putting this episode together. Before we go, I thought I'd do a shout out to our sister podcast, Disability Fail 101. Disability Fail 101 is a candid, comedy-driven podcast hosted by disability advocate Mel Harrison. It explores the awkward but well-meaning moments, hilarious faux pas, and outrageous assumptions that happen when interacting with people with disability. I asked Mel, does she believe in an afterlife?
I do. I think everybody is reincarnated, so that's something I strongly believe, that we don't end in this life. If I'm being sarcastic, I'd say I come back as a bird so I can shit on people, or like a dog. I'd like to think I'd probably come back as a dog.
Disability Fail 101 is worth a listen and available on all your podcast apps. Passing Thoughts is made with the support of the Wicking Trust and the team at 2RPH. Thanks to Marty, Veronica and Barry. And just a reminder, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a topic, something you'd like to share with us, you can email us at passingthoughts@2rph.org.au. I'm Rob Caldor. Thanks for listening.
This is a Radio 2RPH production.